Hello. Welcome to this short documentary slash making of this single page comic I did of the Bremen musician's tale collected by the Grimm brothers and published in the early 19th century. I wanted to illustrate this story since it was very important to me growing up as a kid, and I watched the animation from 1987 made by Nippon Animation, which was obviously a big inspiration for me. If you don't know the story, these four animals meet because they're escaping from their respective owners and end up forming a band and decide to go to the city of Bremen to become musicians there. However, on their way to Bremen, the band spends the night in the forest and they come across a house that's occupied by thieves. Since they are thieves, the animals gang up on them by getting on top of each other in order to emulate some sort of beast and scare the bad guys away. The band is successful in this and decide to keep living at the house. The end. I wanted to capture the key moments of this tale, which would allow me to tell the story in one single page. Distilling this story to only a few panels was a big challenge for me, mainly because the introduction for each animal would take too many panels to do properly. But I came across another version of the story in this Disney animation, which predates the much popular Grimm brothers version of the story. In this earlier version, the animals all live in the same farm and they escape from the same owner, who owns the farm. So I decided to go with this because I could depict all the animals fleeing at the same time, and I could fit all that into a single panel. And so that's where my comic begins. So the beginning was a bit rough for me because I realized I couldn't draw animals because I've never done it before. So I did some studies of animals, and here's a rough draft for the page layout, and then I also did some colored thumbnails to try to figure out the mood for each separate panel, and of course the overall page. I actually recorded footage for all of this, but I lost it. I don't know how, but there you go. So here I started sketching the first panel on paper and just trying to figure things out, setting up some basic perspective guidelines, and then trying to draw a little house and the fence and whatnot. But I soon realized that it would get too complicated because I'm not good at drawing animals. Plus, I had to do the perspective and the background, so it would get a bit crazy. So I just moved to digital so I could manipulate like each separate animal, and I could move them around a little bit. It would make things easier for me. Drawing directly onto the final board wasn't a possibility because watercolor paper isn't ideal for drawing. The paper would end up messy, so transferring the clean line art onto the watercolor paper was the way to go here. Maintaining a good flow for the entire page was important, so I tried to make each panel connect to the next. I made sure the composition of each panel would point towards the next one in some way. For instance, in this panel, we see the donkey, the dog, and the cat walking in the same direction, drawing the arrow towards the next panel. I wanted to make the most iconic moment of the story the centerpiece of the comic, so that all the other scenes would be subordinate to it. This moment symbolizes the unity of all the animals to defeat a greater evil. It was crucial to depict the idea of the thieves facing the unknown, which is the most frightening thing known to men. The only thing they can see is this odd shape that is about to walk in. So in this panel, all the animals arrive at the house and they are observing the thieves inside. The thieves are counting their golden coins and whatnot, and there's a knife at the table, which I took from the animation because it indicates that they're bad guys, I guess. And again, in this panel here, I use this C shape composition just so it connects to the next panel. Well, rather, it points to the next panel. All the animals are on top of each other and they make an arrow, a C shape. In this last panel, I imported the image from the thumbnail that I did, the sketch, and I just started drawing on top of it. And I would make sure that the perspective was right using perspective rulers in Clip Studio Paint. It's just easier to do. And once I had the background figured out, I started drawing the characters. And so, as this is the last panel, it's a nice conclusion for the story. The animals are all happy eating the food that the thieves left, and I just wanted to have a warm mood, there by the candle and the fireplace and all that. So it's a nice conclusion for the story. And here we have the printed out sketch, and then I also went ahead and used masking tape for the final board. And so in this step, I'm tracing the drawing to the final watercolor paper using some pencils and a light table. Well, looking back at it now, maybe this was a waste of time, because you just end up redrawing the same things, even though this is a line art and it is clean. I thought this part of the process was a bit boring to watch, so I didn't record as much footage here, but it's just tracing the drawings and cleaning up a bit. So I made sure to get watercolor paper that didn't have a lot of texture, so I bought some 60% cotton paper, and it's hot pressed, so it doesn't have a lot of texture, but I mean, it just dries too quickly, so that's why you see like parts of the watercolor that just dries up quickly, and it didn't really allow me to cover large patches of the paper without having the watercolor marks all over it, the water edge. And looking back at it now, I should have used other paper maybe, but I mean, the benefit of having low texture, that's great, but just I have a lot of watercolor, water edges on it. As if drawing animals wasn't hard enough, this story forced me to draw these animals that I've never drawn in these weird poses. For instance, like jumping over a fence. So it was extra difficult. I had the lighting for this panel figured out in my head, like I could visualize it, and even in the thumbnail sketch I put it down okay, but when I started painting I realized that I didn't know how the shadow would cast, because the moonlight is behind the characters, but inside the house, well, it's lit by the fireplace and whatnot. So I had to use digital to figure out how I would paint this before I messed up in watercolor. My issue with the panel on the right was that it was too complex. There were these, the thieves were fleeing out of the window, and animals were coming in, and there was different light sources, so it was just confusing. But this just shows that planning goes a long way. I considered removing a lot of that blue that I used for the silhouette because it was too saturated, it was too blue, and it would just, I thought it would just look off because in nature it wouldn't happen. Like specifically under these circumstances where the light is shining from the back and it's at night and all. But since it just looked weird, I just went with it because that was the point, and that's why the moon is shining, the full moon is shining on their backs. It's like the idea was that it would look eerie, so I just went with that. And here I started with the rim light that's caused by the candle that's on the table. But still, like, I didn't want this to be a completely dark silhouette because the door's still open and the moonlight's still shining a little bit. But still, it would have to be dark enough so that it would create the C shape and it would have enough contrast with the rest of the scene, the table and the thieves. For the last panel, and since I wanted to have a warm mood, I masked out the highlights so I could apply a general wash and work on the rest of the scene from there. Masking out the highlights would just enable me to save the widest points of the image so I could balance that out with the darkest areas and then achieve decent values. Here I'm rendering the donkey, and you can see on some of the parts that are dry already that the watermark is very much noticeable. And if you use another watercolor paper, you can get smoother gradients. But in this case, since I'm rendering fur, I don't think it looked too bad. Once I was done with most of the rendering, I removed the masking tape and worked on the parts that were lit by the candle and the fireplace. And here's the final comic. I hope you liked it. I hope you learned something. I certainly did. And thank you for watching.